Good morning, Internet. Katie Z here. How are you? It is Sunday, May 30th, about 7:45 local time. And I'm in the US. So right now in our history, there's a lot going on. And I woke up today, and as I do, as is my pattern in the mornings, I spend a little bit of couple minutes in quiet contemplation and noticed what comes up. And what came up for me today was how remarkable both of my parents were as people, and also as teachers, and the ways that they approached teaching as an act of love, and how over the course of my life they helped me to contextualize the role of teacher as more of um, a position of service, and how they taught me about authority. So I thought today I would share 5 things my parents taught me about authority. And I'm speaking about my parents in the past tense because they have died. So my dad died June 1st, 2017. My mother died April 11, 2018. And Dad's was not a surprise, Mom's was. I'm very grateful to have been there for both of those events. And I think I'm far enough in my grieving process that I can start speaking about them directly and how they influenced me. And so these things that came up for me today about what they taught me also relate to how I'm thinking about how I'm operating right now in this current context. So the first thing my parents taught me about teaching, or anything really, is practice makes permanent. And so there's a phrase here in the US, practice makes perfect. And that shift from there to practice makes permanent has helped me to think about minutia and the mundane. And in that context, it was primarily around like doing scales, that we are that which we habitually do. And as a teacher, facilitator, leader, I guess, position of authority, the way that that shows up is in practicing showing up, practicing showing up for people. And my parents, they showed up. They really did. The second thing they taught me was to be aware of my bias as a teacher, as a person. And they did that in several overt ways. When my brother and I were young, very young, they made a conscious decision to expose us to as many different kinds, shapes, colors, abilities, relationship structures, identities. They were committed to exposure so that David and I, my brother and I, could be aware. And from the perspective of authority and teaching, bias can show up as assumptions about people. And this primarily came from my mother. Like, when sitting in a place of assumption, you kind of stop paying attention a little bit, right? So you've made it as in that position of authority, you've made your decision, but then you stop doing the work. And so, so that second thing, to be aware of bias, and that requires an almost ruthless commitment to self-exploration, which speaks to that first thing about practice making permanent. The third thing they taught me is to meet people where they are. So my parents were musicians, and my father was a professor at Carnegie Mellon in the music department, and hoity-toity. My mother um, was in some of the Pittsburgh schools here, and one of the things that happens with students, music students, often is you have this like weekly lesson. And I was a student, music student for years and years, a weekly lesson. And they were, and I saw it, they were so amazing at accepting whatever came into the house to learn. So if somebody was focused, great. If somebody was having an off day, okay. If somebody was in a period of growth, fine. And what I saw them do and what they told me and taught me about being an authority is that kind of allowance for where somebody is. And in the more like human process-based spaces, that you might know it as holding space. And my parents did that, and I saw it as a kid, and I'm so glad I had time to talk to them about like how they did that. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing they taught me about being in a position of authority is it's not about me. Teaching isn't about the teacher. And I think that's where the service piece comes in, that this kind of authority, this kind of relationship is, it's almost like you're parenting a tiny part or an aspect of somebody. And the charge in that moment, the responsibility in that moment, is to be as fully present and to be able to hold somebody in that as much as possible. It's not about you, right? Which was tough for me as I shifted from performing to teaching, because performance is all about the performer. Right? It's being the star, being on stage, doing this, doing that. So shifting from, me to, okay, sit back, it's about you. You, the person in my charge, not you, the me. Pronouns might be confusing right now. And then the fifth thing was primarily came from my mother. And I, especially in corporate contexts, if I was in HR or helping executives and startups bring people onto teams and working with executives to help them leading workshops and such, I would sometimes reflect to my mother that I was feeling frustrated. It didn't seem like anybody was really engaged. Like, I know what's going on inside somebody. Hello. And my mom said, if you reach one person, you've done your job. Just one. And over the course of my parents' lifetime, that I was able to witness, because we were in deep connection and relationship, over and over and again and again and again, people would come forward to thank my parents for reaching them, for what they did for them. And I will tell you, even though my parents were music teachers, it was never about music, never. It was about the compassion and the love and the caring and the allowing and the open and the generous and the present that they shared and they showed for people. And I mean, they weren't perfect. They fucked up. They made a couple big mistakes. And for the very most part, they did a really good job. And now here we are in this moment with cities on fire and 105,000 dead and people hungry. And there's a tiny little piece of me that's grateful that my parents aren't here to witness this. My mother was one of the most deeply compassionate people I've ever known, and I don't know how she would have managed her empathy. And my father likely would have been a little bit hysterical and because of his health at severely high risk for COVID-19. I didn't think I would cry this morning. Yeah, so I'm just glad that I have the teachings of my parents about teaching to fall back on in my work as a facilitator, and my work as a helper, as a servant for people around identity and sexuality. And now also just being in the world, scary as it is. So, well, I guess we'll just have to see what today brings, won't we? And holding each other softly and practicing. Okay. Bye.